So hello, good evening everyone. So after a very long time, I'm going to start again with the lecture today. Sorry for the delay in between. A lot of days haven't passed. Today we'll take lecture of the varicose veins. So I asked Bhakti to present the PPT. So has Bhakti joined the class? Hello.
Yes, sir. I'm there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So as always, we'll take a short discussion of varicose veins as a theory topic, and then move on with the discussion of practical, because that is what has been worked off for the previous lectures for all those who are joining the first time. So we basically take a small theory discussion of the etiology and pathology of the condition taking place, so that it helps us in understanding the clinical presentation of it and what we actually want to see from the patient and as examiner point of view. And then we'll move on the case presentation. One of you have been asked to present a case. I've asked Bhakti this time to present the case, and she'll first of all see the history. We'll see what are the mistakes and the things that can be changed in the history, and then the examination part, and then we'll move on to the short discussion of treatment part. Okay, short varicose veins is a long case. Okay, so it is skipped quite a few number of times in the UG examinations. There are a variety of tests asked in it. Some of them have to be done, some of them have not to be done. So we'll go on as we go with the lectures. So first of all, we'll start with a brief discussion about varicose veins, very small discussion. So can someone tell me what is varicose veins? Its basic definition and how does it occur in a short manner? Bhakti, can you tell me?
The varicose veins are basically elongated, dilated veins which are tortuous and they bulge out under the skin. And they happen due to local venous hypertension, which leads to venous stasis and then leads to extravasation of blood.
Yeah. Okay. So varicose veins are basically tortuous, dilated, elongated veins. These three words: tortuous, dilated, elongated. They are not only they are tortuous, they are dilated, and they are elongated veins along the course of either great or superficial saphenous or great or small saphenous vein, and occur basically due to chronic venous hypertension. So as to say, so dilated, tortuous, elongated veins occurring secondary to chronic venous hypertension is our definition. Okay. So a few words come about. What is chronic venous hypertension? That is the first and the most important pathophysiology, which leads to varicose veins. So it's a very simple thing. In simple words, basically when the tension inside the veins, not inside the arteries, the veins increases slowly into dilation of the veins and leads to some complications which require treatment. Per se, just dilated veins do not require treatment. The complications or prevention of those complications require treatment. That happens. So can someone tell me what is the etiology of varicose veins? Bhakti?
Venous hypertension leads to venous stasis.
No, not the pathophysiology, the etiology.
So, okay, there are two types. First is primary and secondary. In primary, mostly it is idiopathic. It can be due to familial regions, and there are some precipitating factors
Like
prolonged standing or straining activities, then violent muscular efforts such as pulling stuff like that. And in secondary, it occurs due to obstruction of venous drainage. That may be due to any abdominal pregnancy or during constipation or abdominal tumor present.
okay. So just to clarify, there's a lot of confusion between the classification of the etiology of varicose veins. We confuse a lot of it with DVT and with risk factors and with etiology. These are various terminologies. So my aim every time is to simplify your thinking, to go in a very simple manner, to understand the language of the terminology of any condition, understand the language of it, and then go gradually one by one, so that we can easily simplify what we are doing or what we are thinking. So it is basically of three. The etiology can be divided into three types. It is congenital, primary, and secondary. There are three types. Okay. It is congenital varicose veins, primary, and secondary. The most common of them is primary varicose veins, which is basically idiopathic in nature. So it has risk factors. Those are like long-standing, female sex, multiparity, any condition which leads to bedridden, which leads to venous hypertension. Those are risk factors, not etiological factors. Etiology is idiopathic. There is no definitive thing that this thing leads to directly to the varicose vein in the primary condition. Okay. The congenital condition, it is basically some or the other thing, congenital condition, congenital anatomical abnormality per se, which leads to varicose veins. In the secondary, there is some primary pathology, which is something else like DVT. So post-thrombotic or post-DVT occurring varicose veins is secondary. So these are three terminologies: congenital, primary, and secondary. Primary is idiopathic in nature. There are risk factors. There is no specific etiological factor. There are risk factors. That is the most common type, which we commonly know and which commonly see, which includes risk factors like, as she pointed out, old age, female sex, long-standing jobs, high estrogen to progesterone ratio, pregnancies, multiparity. Okay, got it? The etiological risk factors leading to primary varicose veins, which is the most common type. Secondary is commonly post-thrombotic or post-DVT, that is deep vein thrombosis, secondary to deep vein thrombosis, varicose veins, and the congenital is some congenital abnormality. Okay, so there are a few syndromes associated with varicose veins. Can someone tell me for the congenital type?
Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome.
Yeah. So what is that?
Superficial and deep veins do not have any walls congenitally.
And what is the triad associated with Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome?
That I don't know, sir.
Can someone tell me what are the symptoms of Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome? Anyone? Just give me a few seconds. There are a lot of participants who cannot join, so I'm just live streaming on YouTube. By the time someone answer me what is Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome, I'll just connect the YouTube by the time.
There's varicose veins, limb hypertrophy, birthmarks, like Portwine stain, etc., associated with Klippel-Trenaunay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So what is Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome? Sorry. Yeah. Again, who said that? You just repeat it. Sorry.
So there's associated varicose vein, hypertrophy of limb, and cutaneous birthmarks.
Yeah.
Like Portwine stain.
Perfectly. There basically is a triad of three things. There is varicosities present, obviously. Yeah. Hello. Hello. Am I audible back? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sorry. Is there any echo coming, or is the audio fine? Audio fine?
It's
Yes,
fine.
sir. No echo.
Okay. Yeah. So Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome is basically a triad of three things. There's the presence of varicosities, limb hypertrophy, unilateral or single limb hypertrophy with varicosities in the same limb, and associated birthmarks or associated hemangiomas, so as to say, commonly Portwine stain. This is a triad of Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome. There's a different syndrome known as Klippel-Feil syndrome. That's a different thing. It is short neck and cubital valgus and all those three things. I forgot the triad. It has a triad. It's a different thing. Okay. Klippel-Feil, Klippel-Trenaunay are two different things. Klippel-Trenaunay is in varicose veins. There's also, as someone pointed out, Parker-Weber syndrome, but it is more associated with secondary varicose veins than primary varicose veins because it also has DVT associated with it. So for you, congenital anomalies, there can be isolated absence or isolated incompetent valves, perforator valves, or Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome. These are the two congenital anomalies you should know. Okay, either isolated anomalies or either anomalies associated with it. Okay. Yeah. So these are the congenital type. In the primary type, as I said, rightly pointed out, we have those risk factors, and in the secondary type, we have DVT. Okay. So this was about the etiology of it. Now we move on to the pathophysiology of the varicose veins. So chronic venous hypertension is basically a condition which has a constellation of syndromes and is defined by a specific pressure. So can someone tell me what is chronic venous hypertension? Hello? Yeah, can someone define chronic venous hypertension for me? No one? Bhakti?
Sir,
Yeah.
because of decreased or defective wall, there is a regurgitation of blood. Then, because of that, there is an increase in
No.
diastolic volume.
That is the pathophysiology. I want a definition. There is a specific pressure
Okay.
associated with chronic hypertension. It's fine, you're going the right manner, but the specific definition, chronic venous ambulatory hypertension, is basically defined as increased pressure in the superficial varicose veins of more than 80 to 120 millimeter of Hg. This basically happens because of primarily the cause is incompetent valvular system. Either the perforator or the superficial veins both have valves which are incompetent. So for that we have to go to the basic understanding of the anatomy of the varicose, the superficial venous system. So the superficial venous system, starting the basic, has two veins, great saphenous vein and short saphenous vein, and it has a deep venous system inside the calf muscles, and connecting both those venous system is the perforators. So the key thing to understand is the job of the perforator. It has valves. The perforator generally connects the superficial vein to the deep vein, and it is a one-way valve. It empties normal conditions. It empties the superficial veins, the blood in the superficial veins, into the deep vein, and from the deep vein, the blood goes inside, goes above into the IVC and into the heart. The valve is one way, so it can go from the superficial venous system to the deep venous system, but not vice versa. It cannot go from the deep to the superficial venous system. In presence of incompetence of valve, what happens? The blood goes retrogradely from the deep venous system to the superficial venous system. Okay, the superficial venous system has two veins: medially, great saphenous vein; laterally, short saphenous vein or small saphenous vein. The anatomy of it is not the purview currently. You know it. Medially starts from the near the medial malleolus and goes above and ends in the saphenofemoral junction, the great saphenous vein, and laterally the short saphenous vein is the lateral malleolus and ends in the popliteal vein. I hope you all know that much. Popliteal vein goes above in the deep venous system and directly forms the common femoral vein to the iliac vein and then to the IVC. Okay, so I'm not repeating all those things. You've got a general overview of what it is. So for us, what is importance is the valvular dysfunction of the perforators, because that is a very common cause. If perforator valve are incompetent because of some reason, then there can be backflow in the superficial venous system, or the valves present in the vein itself. Okay, so it can cause backflow of the valves, a backflow of the blood and pooling in the gravitational area. Okay, so the pathophysiology behind chronic venous hypertension is two things. One, the gravitational force in the standing position, which pulls down the blood and keeps the blood located in the distal part of the legs, that is near the ankle. And secondly, the valves, which when incompetent lead to backflow of blood from the deep venous system to the superficial venous system. Okay, and combined both of these, it leads to chronic venous hypertension, which is more than 80 millimeter of Hg pressure at the ankle level. Okay, at the ankle, that is specific. Did everyone get that? Okay, what is chronic venous hypertension? The specific measurement of it and the pathophysiology behind it. There are two important things. And the anatomy of the great saphenous vein, the short saphenous vein, the perforator, the deep vein. Okay, normal conditions, when a person has competent valves, a person when on walking contracts the soleus sinuses, that is the calf muscles having great sinuses and blood inside it, and leads to flow of blood from there towards proximally towards the heart. But in abnormal conditions, because of the valves, it is easier for the blood to flow rather upwards against the gravity through the valves into the superficial venous system. When it flows towards that system, it becomes dilated. Dilated veins are basically nothing else but varicose veins. Why does these things happen? Congenital causes is explainable because of absence of valves. Secondary causes because of DVT. Explaining why does varicose vein happens. You got the pathophysiology of it, that there is retrograde flow and collection of flow. But why does retrograde flow occur? Congenital because of absence of valves. In DVT because there is no there is no way to go it upstairs, to go proximally towards the heart. Okay, because there is deep venous thrombosis anywhere in the deep venous system, the blood cannot obviously go antegrade to the IVC, so it has to go somewhere else. So it causes pressure back into the valves, disrupts the valves, and goes into the superficial venous system. The last idiopathic primary cause, there are a variety of risk factors. The commonly cited are old age, pregnancy, multiparous, estrogen progesterone ratio, and long-standing jobs. Okay, all of them are self-explanatory. Old age, obviously, old age valves become damaged and cannot function properly. Multiparity and pregnancy, both are conditions in which there are increased pressure inside the IVC. Okay, so it causes a backflow. In multiparity per se, and in increased estrogen progesterone ratio. It has been found in studies per se that estrogen and progesterone both are relaxant muscles. They both release relaxin per se and relax the vascular venous system and cause cooling of blood. But when there is increased ratio of it, especially in the first day of menopause, first day of menstrual cycle, not menopause, estrogen increases drastically, progesterone decreases drastically in the first day of menstrual cycle. Okay, that also leads to increased relaxation and pooling. That is why female sex is a preponderance in cases of varicose veins. Okay, can everyone get this? For all those asking questions, please can you keep the questions in the end? We can discuss all those questions in between. In between, if I detour to the questions, it will take a lot of time. So understand the basic pathophysiology. Why does backflow happens? Understand why each of them are risk factors and what is the pathophysiology occurring behind it. Okay, so this leads to, we have established why varicose veins occurs. Okay, but now what is the problem with varicose veins? Okay, can someone explain me what will varicose vein cause? Someone was explaining the pathophysiology of stasis of blood and everything. So explain me those theories. What are the theories by which damage to the blood vessels occurs because of pooling of blood? Okay. Okay, so female sex is a risk factor for varicose veins because of high estrogen progesterone ratio. Both of them are hormones which release relaxin hormones, especially when there is an increased surge or the reciprocating ratio in which estrogen increases suddenly and progesterone decreases suddenly. There is increased pooling and relaxation of blood vessels, which leads to varicose veins. Basically, pooling of blood vessels, which leads to varicose veins. Okay. So, Bhakti, can you explain me the theories which lead to damage in varicose veins?
I don't know. I'll try. So stasis of blood leads to hypertension. Stasis leads to defective microcirculation. Hence, there will be lysing of RBCs, which releases hemosiderin. So one of the consequences are pigmentation and dermatitis. Also, oozing of serous fluid can lead to itching. And
Yeah.
This will also cause the epithelial and endothelial damage, leading to ulceration over the skin.
Do you know some terminology of the name of this theory, which you are explaining?
One is fibrin cuff theory.
So which are you explaining? Which was that one?
This fibrin cuff.
Okay. And
microcirculation defect.
The other theory?
I don't know. So I don't know.
Someone else, can you tell me the other theory of? Actually, that is the more accepted one. But anyway, both are same. What is the other theory?
The other theory is chronic ambulatory venous hypertension.
Yeah, chronic ambulatory venous hypertension. But what is the name of the theory? Both of them are chronic ambulatory venous hypertension only. One is fibrin cuff theory, and another is
WBC migration theory.
Yeah, trapping theory. WBC trapping theory. Okay. Yeah, very good. So this is the reasoning behind what damage occurs by varicose veins. So varicose veins, there is pooling of blood. Because of pooling of blood, what happens is the blood stays at a single location at that place. The RBCs over there damage and corrode the vessels over there. This leads to damage and causing of fibrin accumulation and gradual percolation of that fibrin and RBC lysis outside in the surrounding tissue, or perivenular tissue, so as to say, surrounding the venous system. This leads to obviously inflammation, more mediators coming there, and leading to redness, itching, and per se ultimately ulceration. Okay, that is the fibrin cuff theory. In the WBC trapping theory, it's the same thing. Instead of the fibrin cuff, they are saying that WBC traps over there and leads to increased inflammation. But the basic concept is chronic venous ambulatory hypertension leads to pooling of blood. Pooling of blood leads to some kind of damage, which leads to either fibrin trapping or WBC trapping. Any of that leads to increased inflammation. Increased inflammation leads to obviously increased inflammatory mediators coming over there, which leads to pain, itching, and consequently, in the end, ulceration. Okay. So by this, we can get to know a lot of things why varicose veins is problematic for us. The end result is ulceration, and post that, the damage to the limbs, which leads to ultimately bony damage and disfigurement of the bony arches and movements. Okay, the main area which is damaged is around the ankle, because that is the area which is the most which bears the most brunt of gravitation in standing. Okay, so with that, I think so a lot of the doubts regarding how and what is the etiology, the risk factors, and basic understanding behind those etiology and risk factors of varicose veins have been cleared out. If someone has doubts at this point for etiology and pathophysiology, now let's just discuss all of that. Then we'll move on to the case presentation and the various symptoms. Okay. So if anyone has a doubt for that, I'll see the chat box, and you can also speak out the doubt. If someone has asked that what is the definition of chronicity, there is no definition for chronicity per se. When varicose veins develops, it is a chronic condition only. It is not an acute condition, never. And the congenital causes are two primarily. One of them is absence of idiopathic, just absence of perforator valves. The second is, as we said, syndromes like Parker-Weber syndrome and Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome. And the theories, so as to repeat, because of any of the risk factors which lead to damage to the valves present in the perforators per se, because that is the most important thing. It is the perforator either between the superficial and the deep veins, or the saphenofemoral junction incompetence. These are the only two things which are damaged, which lead to varicose veins. There is nothing else. Either the perforator valves or the SFJ incompetence. And these are the two important things to know clinically also. These are damaged because of variety of things, as I have already explained. The congenital, primary, and secondary causes, because of variety of risk factors. Once they are damaged, chronic venous pooling occurs. Then the theory is, because of the pooling, the blood stays over there. There is stasis of blood over there, which leads to damaging of the endothelium of the vein, it is the venous endothelium, by the RBCs, which ultimately leads to percolation of the RBCs along with formation of fibrin cuff over there, and lead to inflammatory markers and mediators. That is the fibrin cuff theory. Fibrin cuff theory. The second theory is WBC trapping theory. It's the same theory. Instead of fibrin cuff, they are saying that WBC trapping occurs. There's microcirculation injury, WBC trapping occurs, and inflammation occurs. Ultimately, inflammation leads to inflammatory mediators, swelling, edema, itching, ulceration. That is the flowchart by which it goes on. Okay. Any other doubts? It's not that important on the risk factors. Everyone knows that. Just the types to know are important, because many of times you confuse the primary and secondary type. Secondary type is post DVT, primary is just idiopathic, and congenital is separate type. So that is how we differentiate it. Otherwise, it's not such an important thing. So I think so we spent enough time on it. So now let's move on to the case presentation, and along with that, we'll go with the symptoms and everything. Okay. So Bhakti, start sharing your slide.
Yes. No, it's showing disabled.
Yeah, just a second. Yeah, share now.
Okay. So shall I start?
Yeah, start, sir.
A 30-year-old Hindu male patient named Mr. XYZ, hailing from Asarwa, Ahmedabad, working in a factory belonging to low socio-economic status, came to Civil Hospital, Ahmedabad with chief complaints of tortuous swelling in left lower limb since 5 years and pain on walking since last 2 months. On elaborating ODP, the patient was relatively asymptomatic before 5 years, when he noticed a swelling which was initially painless and seen only on standing. The swelling initially appeared in lower part of left leg around ankle and later extended up to the present side, which is upper part of thigh. The patient developed pain before 2 months, which is dull aching and dragging in nature, appears on walking a few hundred meters, and is always relieved by rest and elevation of limb. There is no history of intermittent claudication, night cramps, or rest pain. Negative history. No history of itching, ulceration, or oozing in the lower third of the leg present. No history of bleeding from the swelling present. No history of attacks of redness and calf pain along the swelling with fever. No history of similar swelling or pain in other leg. No history of bleeding per rectum. No history of any lump in abdomen. Past history. No history of similar illness in either leg previously. No history of prolonged bed rest, recent fracture, or any major surgery. Personal history. Patient gives history of working in standing position without elastic stockings for 8 hours per day for last 10 years. No history of bladder or bowel disturbances. No history of smoking. No history of varicose veins in family. General, I continue with the
No,
examination.
stop there. Stop. Start with the first slide. History. Okay. So first of all, as every time, if you are the first one to go and present varicose veins, they'll obviously start with name, age, sex, history, chief complaints, that ODP. Always that happens. And per se, you should also know a few things. That is one. That is which is the sex which is more common for varicose veins, male or females? Bhakti?
Female sex.
Yeah. Okay. I already explained that the risk factor is female sex and not male sex. Okay. So female sex is the more commoner out of the two. That is will be asked because of pregnancy, multiparity, and estrogen progesterone present in females and not males, and that is why it's obviously more common in females. The second is occupation. Everyone knows that long-standing occupation is a risk factor for varicose veins. Okay, but per se, these things are the important risk factors. Apart from long-standing occupation, are also old age, which is a very important risk factor, because even if the patient is not long-standing, old age can lead to varicose veins. That happens in a lot of things, and family history is also very important. So these are important risk factors that are given over here. And the chief complaint. The chief complaint is either of the two. First of all, in chief complaint, generally avoid the word tortuous per se, because tortuous will come in the ODP after the, or even after sometime even after examination, because by history you cannot say tortuous swelling. So swelling in the left lower limb is more than enough. The most common chief complaint is swelling. The second chief complaint is the laking pain. Okay, so pain on walking, or rather than not on pain on walking, on long standing will be the common history. The patient will not give pain on walking, or it will give long standing pain on pain on long standing. Sorry. Okay, so these are the things that I have to change on the in the ODP part. And the next part. Okay, so as I always tell, go systematically. Just a small review that I gave for the anatomy and the pathophysiology and etiology. So as to understand the risk factors per se, no one will ask you the pathophysiology or anatomy in any case, neither in Viva nor in NEET nor in the theory. But what will be asked commonly in the case specifically is the DD of the type of pain and the other differentials that can be ruled out. They always say go out systematically. The first complaint is swelling and pain. So what are the differential diagnoses of swelling in the leg? Differential diagnosis of pain in the leg. Okay. So what are the differential diagnoses firstly of swelling in the leg? This will also help you sharpen your knowledge of clinical syndromes. Okay, it will help you to see clinics and per se patients. So swelling in the leg, the common things. 1, 2, 3 common DD. Bhakti,
Deep vein
yeah. Okay, deep vein thrombosis.
So then, in general, phlebitis, vein swelling.
Then
if bilateral edema is there, so some renal or cardiac cause can also be there.
Okay, don't go to bilateral edema, we're going for surgery. So bilateral edema is a medical cause. Something else? Can someone else like to tell top 3 causes of swelling in the leg? I think so said one of it. Anyone? You can type if you want. Okay, so the top 3 causes, the most common cause of swelling. Okay, obviously bilateral swelling in the leg is more common or equally common as the most common cause for surgical. Medical causes are bilateral swelling in the neck, that is a bilateral leg swelling, which are because of cirrhosis or renal edema or nephrotic syndrome, or a lot of causes, which are all medical causes. So I'm not going to that thing. Yes, obviously rule out bilateral swelling because that is more common. So the first thing in your negative history should be no similar swelling in the opposite leg, because sometimes that is swelling. But here the most common cause for surgical is cellulitis. Okay, the first is cellulitis, second is DVT, third is all other causes combined, which can be either because of lymphedema, it can be because of varicose veins, it can be because of some local sting bite, some local trauma, all those things. Okay, the most common cause is cellulitis, the second most common is DVT, followed by that all other causes. So these are the 3 how we rule out any swelling, unilateral swelling per se in the leg. Bilateral swelling in the leg, common cause is obviously the medical causes of bilateral edema, that is edema, not swelling per se. So edema can be liver disease, renal failure, heart failure, all of those things, hypoalbuminemia, hypothyroidism. I'm not going to all the things, but obviously you rule out swelling in the left leg, not in the right leg. So you will say right or left or both. So unilateral swelling in the leg, cellulitis is the first thing to rule out. So how do you rule out cellulitis? That is, you have to rule out any history of fever, tender redness, and fever and redness are 2 things on history. Rest all things are on examination. Okay, how do you rule out DVT? DVT has a generalized calf swelling, vis-a-vis varicose veins has a swelling per se near the ankle region only, a specific localized swelling. Okay, he will not say per se okay, varicose veins is venous swelling, because he cannot describe that on the basis of history. Okay, so the first thing you rule out is swelling, whether it is associated with pain, fever, yes or no. So cellulitis present or no. In cases of varicose veins, there is dull aching pain, there is not severe pain, there is no fever definitely. Cellulitis is ruled out. Then on examination also we rule out cellulitis again, because sometimes even a superadded complication of varicose veins is cellulitis on varicose veins. That is also an important thing. So the first thing you will have to rule out is cellulitis in any surgical patient when swelling comes, because it is an emergency condition and you have to immediately manage him with the help of antibiotics or with the help of fasciotomy, whatever it is. Okay. Second thing is DVT, both because DVT is both a causative factor for varicose veins, and individually DVT is also responsible for a lot of complications. Okay, so you always rule out DVT. DVT will not have redness, DVT will not have tenderness. DVT is very vague swelling in the leg. You can rule out only and only with the help of history that it has chronic conditions of immobilization, some fractures, some malignancies, history of ossipils. These are risk factors for DVT. Okay, there is the scoring system. Does someone know the scoring system for DVT? Scoring system for prediction or risk factors of DVT. What is that known as?
Wells scoring system.
Yeah, modified Wells scoring system. That is the scoring system given in Harrison. Please read it once. Both for DVT and pulmonary embolism. Obviously, more important for pulmonary embolism, but it is also important for DVT. Okay. So it has a variety of scores, one being malignancy, prolonged immobilization, orthopedic surgeries, general surgeries, occipit use, all those things. So that is also you have to rule out on the basis of history. For varicose veins, the patient will be generally mobile, he won't be immobile. Okay. So that is on the basis of history. If we come for pain, what is the type of pain in varicose veins? What is the classical symptom of pain in varicose veins?
Continuous dull aching,
And
relieved by raising the leg, and increases in the evening time.
yeah. Okay. Something else? Okay. So the pain is, someone pointed out, it is dull, aching, continuous, dragging type of pain, which occurs usually in the evening after long standing and relieved by raising the leg above the level of the heart, not just raising the leg. Okay. compared to it, the differential of pain in the leg is, I already taught that. What is the differential of pain in the leg?
PVD, intermittent claudication.
Yes, and other differentials?
Cellulitis also there will be acute pain, no?
Yes. Then
Neuropathy, pain due to neuropathy.
what is the pain in intermittent claudication? And what is the pain in neuropathy? And what is the pain in varicose veins? And what is the pain in DVT?
So the pain in the intermittent claudication appears after walking for some distance.
Yes. Then there
Uh,
are 3 points for all those who attended lecture last time. The 3 points. The first point is that then
Relieves in less than 5 minutes also. And it is reproducible.
yes. So can someone frame it completely?
The pain is not at the first step and it is relieved on sitting or standing in less than 5 minutes and it is reproducible.
And the nature of the pain, you are starting and ending the pain, but what is the pain? How is the pain like?
It is cramping pain, muscular or spasmodic.
Yes, yes, that is how it is. The pain of intermittent claudication is very important to know. Even if you do not get varicose veins, you should know the pain of intermittent claudication. Okay, it is an artery. The classical intermittent claudication pain is because of PVD, which is basically not present on the first step, present after walking some distance. It is a crampy type of sudden onset pain, which is relieved after taking rest, but not immediately, but within less than 5 minutes, and is reproducible. So reproducible is one thing, the nature of the pain is second thing, and when does it start and when does it end is the third thing. Okay, please know that pain, it is a sharp crampy type of pain which occurs not on the first step, after taking a few steps, which is relieved after a few minutes but not immediately relieved on sitting or resting, whatever it is, and is reproducible. That is the claudication pain in intermittent claudication because of PVD. Because of varicose veins, the pain is classically dull, aching, continuous pain after long standing job in the night, classically in the evening or the night, and relieved by taking rest when we elevate the leg above the heart. The pain in neurogenic claudication is a sharp lancetating type of pain because of nerve injury per se. The sharp lancetating type of pain which occurs immediately on walking or standing before the first step, that is the differentiating diagnosis, and is relieved immediately on stopping. So that is how you differentiate it. The character when start and when it ends. First step, first step. In intermittent claudication, it does not start immediately, does not end immediately, and it is a crampy type of pain, muscular pain, in neurogenic nerve pain. In venous pain, it is again the muscle pain along with the dragging pull of the blood because of gravity pain, but it occurs because of dull aching, not sharp pain, and after a very long duration of time. And in venous claudication, what is venous claudication? The pain of varicose vein is not venous claudication. Okay, the pain of venous claudication is because of
deep venous thrombosis.
yes. So the pain over there is
Cramping pain.
cramping is in intermittent claudication.
Don't know, sir.
Someone else?
Bursting type of pain.
Yeah, bursting type of pain. Very good. So the pain in DVT is a sharp bursting type of pain present in the entire calf. There is a sudden onset sharp bursting type of pain present in the entire calf, and which is relieved after standing or after obviously relieved after rest. This is because of DVT, it is not because of varicose veins. Venous claudication is a pain secondary to DVT or a post-thrombotic limb. Varicose veins pain is not a claudication pain. Claudication means a sudden onset and sudden going. That is neurogenic claudication, venous claudication, and arterial claudication. We have already discussed that in PVD. I hope you all that you remember all of that. Varicose veins is a different type of pain. So the differential diagnosis how to put, as she has pointed out, the pain is dull aching. The pain is, as you can see, the pain is dull aching, dragging type of, appears after walking a few hundred meters and relieved by rest and elevation of limb. Contradictory to all this type of pain. So in the negative history, you have to write that There is no history of sharp onset of either bursting type of pain, no brain of intermittent claudication, and no neurogenic is not necessary. Just specify to rule out PVD and DVT. Neurogenic pain is not necessary to differentiate or to write in the negative history because it's not a common pain. But DVT is important because you will have to write there is no history of severe bursting pain in the calf, because it can be secondary post-thrombotic limb also for varicose veins, and you will always have to rule out PVD because the commoner out of the two is PVD, not varicose veins. Okay, so this is how you differentiate swelling and differentiate pain in the limb. Okay, did you get all the differentials? The three common cellulitis, three common differential for swelling, and the three common differential for pain. Okay, so this is how you do it. Then you move on and you have established that the swelling is localized in some part of the limb. By the history, you can say that the swelling is located, the patient complains of swelling in the medial part of the left ankle or right ankle, with no swelling in the proximal part, no swelling in the contralateral limb, no history of the pain is dull, aching, dragging after standing. There is no history of sharp lancetating pain, sharp bursting type of pain, or no history of pain or sudden crampy pain, suggestive of intermittent claudication. Then you have established kind of on the basis of history that is the varicose veins. So now you have to rule out negative history for the cause and for the complications. Every time you go systematically, okay? So you have found out the varicose veins. The next slide, please. The next slide, the negative history, you have to rule out cause and complications. The cause, there are a variety of causes, but that will be covered in the family history, personal history, some in the negative history. Okay, so negative history, the cause ruled out is DVT. So obviously no history specifically of sudden swelling of the calf in the past or sudden bursting pain in the calf in the past. That is DVT. There is swelling and there is sharp bursting type of pain. That is not present. DVT ruled out. Complications are ulcerations, lipodermatosclerosis. These are two common complications, and edema. Okay. So, and hemorrhage, obviously. Yes. So bleeding, she has mentioned, itching, ulceration, oozing. That is all about lipodermatosclerosis and ulceration. And no attacks of redness and cough along with swelling and fever. That is cellulitis superimposed on varicose veins or chronic venous hypertension. So why have you mentioned no bleeding per rectum and no lump in the abdomen?
So in Bhatta, there was given that if hemorrhoids or any obstruction is there, so in straining it might lead to varicose veins.
So explain. So long-standing condition in which there is straining that can be used to
Bleeding
that can be
lead to
co-associated bleeding per rectum. But why lump in the abdomen? That is bleeding per rectum.
Bleeding per rectum to rule out hemorrhoids because it was written
why
over
lump
there.
in the abdomen? That is fine.
Because of any abdominal tumor or maybe
So what does
present
that
which
do?
may obstruct. That obstruct the venous drainage to the lower limb.
So what classically you know that which is the thing that blocks the vein, which tumor or which condition person? Which have you heard about the gonadal veins and which vein is common for blockage? The anatomy, because you have written lump in the abdomen, then you justify yourself. Can someone justify lump in the abdomen or which venous system is blocked and what does it cause?
Varicocele to rule out that.
Varicocele is not for varicose veins. That is not an association. So varicocele, where does varicocele occur? Come on, which tumor?
In scrotum and testicular tumor.
So which type of which side testicular tumor and which vein is involved? That is what I'm pointing out.
I don't know.
Left-sided.
Yeah. Why left-sided?
Because the gonadal vein will drain into the left
vein at 90
vein.
degree.
And right drains into the IVC.
Directly, right? Yeah. So the syndrome per se that is used for the lump in the abdomen is sometimes with tumors there is association of gonadal vein incompetence, which is known as nutcracker syndrome. Okay. So nutcracker syndrome is like a nutcracker. So the gonadal vein is sandwiched between the insertion of the left renal vein and the IVC per se, because it's an acute angle. So the gonadal vein is sandwiched between it. It leads to gonadal vein incompetence. Incompetence will always lead to backflow, obviously, and this will lead to a varicosities or varicocele in the scrotum. Per se, varicocele and varicose veins are not associated, but you will always have to ask history of varicocele in the scrotum and varicosities in the perineum region because of two things. One is, as I pointed out, the gonadal vein incompetence occurring in nutcracker syndrome. Okay, nutcracker syndrome. Okay, so that is something for varicosities in the scrotum. For varicosities in the perineum, can someone tell me in females what is the syndrome known as?
Fibroid.
I've already done it. So it's the pelvic congestion syndrome. So sometimes there are varicosities in the perineal area or the perineum, in the vulva and the perineum area, which is pelvic congestion syndrome. So idiopathic syndrome, the last thing you should think of to rule out, but there is association of dyspareunia, chronic pelvic pain, and pelvic congestion along with varicose veins. That is pelvic congestion syndrome. Okay, a rare syndrome, but because you have gone into lump in the abdomen, sometimes the examiner can ask you all these things. Nutcracker syndrome, pelvic congestion syndrome, males and females. Okay, is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you always ask for history of vulvar varicosities, perineal varicosities, and scrotal varicosities. Fine. Ruled out on the basis of history, all complications, etiology, and definitively stamp that it looks like varicose veins. Move on to the family history and the personal history. What is important for personal history? What is the predisposing factor in personal history?
Long-standing position.
Yeah, that is occupation has already come. Personal history. So smoking, as is already mentioned, smoking can lead to again the same thing, damage to the endothelium and pooling of blood in varicosities and all those things. So again relevant. And again in the personal history, she has mentioned that no history of working in starting position without elastic stocking for 8 hours. Okay, do not mention that. Okay, you are not stamped when you are asking the history. You are not asking it retrogradely कि हाँ मैं varicose vein की history ले रही हूँ and then I am asking elastic stocking. Okay, so do not write without elastic stocking. History of long standing job, the person works for about 8 hours per day for this last 10 years is okay. If you write without elastic stockings, then you already stamped that this is the history. Okay,
Sorry, sir.
okay, the next thing, as family history pointed out, next thing, yeah, right, examination bolte पूरा.
Sorry, sir.
Examination, start the examination.
I examine patient in well-lit room after taking consent. The patient is conscious and well-oriented to time, place, and person. He is averagely built and nourished. He is afebrile and pulse and BP are within normal range. No signs of any lymphadenopathy present. Local examination inspection. There is tortuous dilated non-pulsatile long vessel extending from in front of the medial malleolus along the medial aspect of leg and thigh to upper part of thigh. Suggestive of long. So do I say what does it suggest or just say what I see?
No, just say what you see. Never suggestive of it, not in your examination part. It's in summary part, in the diagnosis part. Okay, so don't retrogradely stamp it as a varicose veins. You're still inspecting it, palpating it, and then ending it out. So you don't have to specify there's an ankle flare, there's saphenopharynx. These are terminology which you have to keep for the examiner to ask that what is that known as. Or you just say, if you're very pro and you feel that you have to directly stamp it, no history of saphenopharynx. Don't say both of those things. Or no history of ankle flare. Don't explain the terminology and say the terminology. Don't do both those things. Okay, so any one of that. Preferably don't say terminology, because at the UG level it is not expected directly through terminologies, and the PG level it is fine if you directly say saphenopharynx because you are passed out UG. So that is why say the condition. So note whatever you written, remove the brackets.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is no secular dilatation near saphenous opening. No localized dilated segment of vein can be seen. No reticular veins can be seen around ankle. The skin over the lower third of leg is pigmented and scaly, but no oozing, ulceration or edema present. No deformity of foot present. Nails of feet and hair on toes appear normal. Palpation. No local rise of temperature. No tenderness over the vein. No cord-like thickening or nodules along the vein. On performing various tests. Fagan's test. No pit is palpable along the vein. A Brody-Trendelenburg's test. Positive. That is, on releasing pressure immediately.
Do not say that. See.
On standing, there is quick filling of blood from. Okay, only positive.
Yeah, so what is the finding? Brutally eliminate positive, positive, double positive, whatever it is. Okay. Or either say the other thing and don't say positive, positive. Again, the same thing. Yeah, continue.
Oshner-Mohanner's differential tourniquet test shows incompetency of saphenofemoral valve, ankle, and below knee perforator. Morris's test, cuff impulse at saphenous opening is positive. Schwartz test positive. Perthes test negative. Systemic examination. Inguinal lymph nodes are not enlarged. No lump palpable per abdomen. No scrotal swelling present.
Yeah, finish it off. Complete. See the diagnosis and summary.
So my provisional diagnosis is Mr. XYZ has primary uncomplicated varicosities of left long saphenous system with incompetence of saphenofemoral valve, ankle, and below knee perforators without any clinical evidence of deep vein thrombosis.
Okay. So if we start off with the first slide. Yeah, the local examination part. General examination is not important per se for varicose veins. There's nothing specific for general examination. Not like PVD in which you have to see other signs and all those things. Varicose veins is a local examination. So start with local examination only. So first thing to see, the first thing that will determine, see, when you start off examination, your aim, as I said in history, your aim should be to convince the examiner that it is a varicose veins. In examination, again, convince the examiner the varicose veins and stamp the degree, the severity of varicose veins. Okay. So just to start off directly, what you have to see, the first thing is which site. Okay. So short saphenous system or great saphenous system, which system is involved, or perforators, or all three of them, or any one of them, or which two of them. So by inspection, which vessels or where is it seen. So anatomically, as I said, the great saphenous vein or the great saphenous system is the medial one. If you see swelling near the ankle, medial mediolus, and moving on medially near the knee or above near the saphenofemoral junction, that is what is the great saphenous system. Short saphenous system laterally ending in the popliteal vein, that is in the posterior aspect. Perforators in between. Okay, singular small varicosities. Okay, that is first thing you have to determine. The second thing you to determine is again the complications present or not. That is very important. Just a second. Yeah. Okay. So the third thing is, the third thing which you have to determine is what if complication is present, what complications are present, all them, and lastly you have to classify and stamp the severity of the grading of varicose veins. Okay. So moving on one by the other, anatomically which side is involved, that is important. What are the complications of varicose veins? Oh, let's move on. What is the classification of varicose veins, or the terminology which is used for classification of varicose veins?
CEAP classification.
Yeah, so what is that?
The clinical etiology, anatomy, and pathophysiology classification.
For all of them, it's a CEAP classification. For you to, in the end, always mention the grade that the patient is in. So in the diagnosis, write whatever C2, E, whatever it is, determine it and write it. It makes a good impression, a better impression. Okay. So first of all, what is the difference between varicose veins and, as she has pointed out, ankle flare and telangiectasia or reticular veins? What is that? What is the reticular vein? What is telangiectasia? And what is varicose veins?
The differences in the sizes.
Yeah. So what is the difference in size of
reticular less than 3 mm, varicose in centimeter?
There are three things: telangiectasia, reticular, and varicose. So size of each of them and importance, because you have to see everything is determined. And in the end, the result, it should be relevant to your clinical diagnosis and relevant to your clinical treatment part. Otherwise, that is not relevant at all. There is no need to do variety of things, and there is no relevance, and do not do that. Okay. So telangiectasia is less than how much?
1 mm.
3 millimeter. Varicose veins is less than or more than?
3 millimeter. Reticular is between 1 to 3 millimeter, and telangiectasia is less than 1 millimeter.
Yeah. Okay. So, the importance of each of these. Why do you want to differentiate these?
Which level? Like telangiectasia, they occur in intradermal venules. Varicose, they occur in subcutaneous.
Why does it matter then?
Varicose and reticular are more functional abnormalities, whereas the telangiectasia is a cosmetic blemish.
So telangiectasia do not or should not be treated unless and until specified by the patient that he has a cosmetic problem with it. There is no functional problem. Telangiectasia is not symptomatic, nor is it required to treat it. It can be idiopathic without actual presence of chronic venous ambulatory hypertension or without presence of defect in the valvular system or the veins. It can be present idiopathically, but cosmetically, if the patient wants, it can be removed or it can be treated. The rest too have to be treated because it will ultimately reticular will lead to varicose veins lead to all those complications ahead. Okay, that is its importance. Pathophysiology is fine where it's present intradermally, subcutaneously, but clinically that is the importance of telangiectasia and reticular veins. Okay, so yeah, so then now what is the classification? CEAP, you do not need to know E, A and P. I'm telling that for you. E is etiology, A is anatomy, P is pathophysiology. It is CEAP. Okay, so 4 letters. It is classified by 4 letters: CEAP: clinical, etiological, anatomical, and pathology. Etiology, either it is primary, congenital, or secondary, whatever it is. On the basis of history, if you can tell, otherwise write primary. So it just ends it. Okay. Anatomically, there are 16 gradings on the basis of which vein is involved. A1 to A16. So 1 to 5 are superficial venous systems, and the rest is perforator and deep and all those things. You do not need to know those gradings. It is fine. P is for pathology, so it is either obstructive, refluxive, or both. What is the pathology? Either is it because of some obstructive cause, that is DVT, because of some reflux, that is valvular incompetence or reflux, or combined, that is pathophysiology, pathology. So you write P, after P you write in small letters either R, O, or RO. So that is all those things. Etiology, you write E, congenital, primary, or secondary. And anatomically, superficial or deep, that's enough for you. You don't need to know the gradings or the numberings per se. What's important is clinically. So clinically, there are 0 to 6.
Yes.
Elicit that. What are those?
So 0 is there is no sign of venous disease.
Yeah.
C1 is telangiectasia or reticular veins present. C2 is varicose veins. C3 is edema. C4A pigmentation or eczema. C4B lipodermatosclerosis or atropine blanche. C5 is healed venous ulcer, and C6 is active venous ulcer.
Okay, so a few changes. See, this is the difference when you speak relevant to clinical and when you speak just from the text. See, the thing was right. There's no issue with these things, but if you speak in a different manner, it's always better. See, 1, 2 is fine. 1 is telangiectasia or reticular veins. Why is it 1? Because it is not relevant clinically and you can keep it conservatively or cannot treat it per se. C2 varicose veins, the management changes. Varicose veins has to be treated but does not need aggressive management, can be treated conservatively. C3, what is C3? It is edema without skin changes. Okay, skin changes is a specific thing. There is no skin changes, there is just edema. That is why it is important to stress without skin changes. C4 is skin changes but there is no ulceration. There is no signs of ulceration. That means C4 ABC. But the important thing is skin changes occurring. What are the skin changes? Can someone elicit the skin changes? And as we go that, we'll see those things clinically also. What are the skin changes?
So pigmentation, eczema, lipodermatosclerosis.
And you said almost all of them: atrophic blanche, pigmentation, lipodermatosclerosis, coronaphlebectasia. All the skin things are skin changes. But classically, it is described as brawny edema, the first stage. Followed by that, there can be lipodermatosclerosis. Followed by that, venous ulceration. So that is how you describe skin changes. So I will just show you a figure diagram of that. Yeah. So if you can see over here, this is a classic diagram, a classic photo of varicose veins occurring gradually increasing in severity. Okay, so here you can see hyperpigment. Can everyone see the photo? Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. So here you can see there is blackening of skin or hyperpigmentation, that is skin change number 1. Second skin change is there is gradual tapering and thickening of skin over here, which is lipodermatosclerosis. Lipodermatosclerosis is basically a terminology which is a constellation of syndromes occurring in the severe stage of varicose veins. So lipodermatosclerosis is not just one syndrome, it is lipodermatosclerosis. So the dermis and the lipodermatosclerosis is a terminology which is called sclerosis of the skin. The dermis becomes basically thickened and blackened. So hyperpigmentation, thickening of the skin, browning edema, followed by that symptoms like pruritus, itching, and in the end ulceration. So this is a classic varicose vein seen over here. Okay. Yeah. So that is C4. C4 was skin changes. C3 was just edema. Sorry. Hello. Yeah. C4 was skin changes. C3 was just edema. But there is no ulceration. As you have seen the diagram, there is no ulceration seen. If there is ulceration, let me show you ulceration. That is C5 if there is an healed ulceration, and C6 if there is an active ulceration. So the last stage is ulceration, obviously. Just wait for the I'll show you the diagram. Just wait. So that, we have to determine which stage is it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Ulceration is the last stage and it requires the most aggressive management, starting from the initial management of ulcer to the end. Let me load that figure. By that time we can continue with the presentation. Sorry, Bhakti, share your slide again. So now this basically determines our aim. So we are now clear what do we want to see from the from our history and examination, what grading and what pathophysiology do we want to see. Okay, so the first thing, as she has mentioned, the system involved, the long tortuous dilated non-pulsatile long vessel, you per se don't say, swelling is the ideal word, extending in front of the medial malleolus along the medial aspect of the leg through the thigh. So suggestive of long varicose veins is not required. It is obvious, it is long saphenous veins, or if the examiner has long saphenous veins. So first, inspection, which system? Inspection stamps the system. Okay. Then on the basis of test, we see whether SFJ incompetence is present or which incompetence is present. No dilation of soft saphenous system, that is a good thing. Saphenaverics. What is saphenaverics? What is saphenaverics?
Varicosity at the level of groin.
Which varicosities? What does that indicate?
It indicates incompetence of saphenofemoral junction.
Yes, very good. So saphenaverics is basically the SFJ incompetence or SFJ incompetence showing a small pouching or bulging near the SFJ, which is a sacral dilation, which is saphenaverics. The other terminologies used are, as discussed, lipodermatosclerosis, Browning edema, saphenaverics, and telangiectasia and ankle flare. We have already discussed all these things. There are a few other things we'll discuss as we go. The skin over the lower third of the leg is pigmented and scaly, but no oozing, ulceration, or edema present. So there is a specific name used for the lower third of the leg involvement in varicose veins. What is that name used at? What is the region known as?
Gaiters.
Yeah. So it's basically known as the gaiter region. So gaiter was something that was used to cover that region in hilly climates. Yeah, in hilly climates, gaiter was a thing that was used to cover that region per se, and that is the commonly affected area. Lower 1/3 of the leg, classically around the ankle, and that is the area as seen, which is involved in lipodermatosclerosis. Also, no deformity of foot is present. I always want you guys to specify that. Why is that important? Why does deformity of foot happen, or what is the deformity seen? Hello, Bhakti, why have you mentioned deformity of foot?
It occurs due to contracture following fibrosis due to lipodermatosclerosis.
Exactly. So that is what I'm trying to tell out, that you always have to, that is the last and the most severe stage of varicose veins, and then the veins are that way deformed that lipodermatosclerosis leads to damage to the bones or the arches of the foot, as I said, and leads to talipes equinovarus or equinovalgus, but varus is more common. Talus equinovarus is more common. So that is why arches are involved. So you always write deformity of foot, and nails of feet and hairs on toes appear normal is used for what? Why is that mentioned? In which condition is nails and feet and hair on toes are affected? So there is a very good presentation per se. You mentioned almost everything, but the importance of nails and hair. Come on.
PVD.
Yeah. So PVD, atrophic changes and end stage ischemic changes, the nails and hair on toes goes away. That is a good differentiated. It's still not standard diagnosis. We have kind of concluded it's varicose veins, but we have to always rule out PVD. So that is the most common thing in the leg, apart from varicose veins. So system involved, one. Secondly, the complication seen. Thirdly, the specific terminology, that is Stephanovarix, corner phlebectasia and ankle flare and all those things. Always mention those things. And the last, complications of ulcerations and deformities, which he has mentioned. Okay, so do not forget to mention motor deformity, that is deformity of foot, which is very rightly pointed out over here. Deformity of foot is important to mention, and on the basis of inspection, the system involved. Okay, so the next slide. Again, the same thing. Why is tenderness over the vein mentioned? What is tenderness of the vein indicate? Tenderness and cord-like thickening. What does all those things indicate?
Vasculitis.
Something more common than vasculitis. Vasculitis does not lead to all those things, but still something more common.
Thrombophlebitis.
Yeah, so thrombophlebitis is a common thing. Thrombophlebitis always again has to be ruled out because it is a commoner condition than varicose veins of both the upper and lower limbs. So mention it. It's a good thing to mention that. And then obviously moving on to the test. Okay, so the standard question, as a lot of cases have these days, a lot of things which are either done or not done. So again, in this thing, we have a lot of controversies whether to do tourniquet test or not. Per se, according to my, if you ask me, again, it's a controversial thing. So variety of examiners may say variety of things. You should not do any test. Okay, a lot of examiners may ask, maximum if you want to do, you can do Brody's tunnel limb test. Do not do any other tests. They're not required. You should know the terminology and how do you perform this test. But if asked, you can say that because nowadays duplex or Doppler ultrasound is a extension of clinical examination and used commonly. This is the word you use, the line you use. Duplex ultrasound or Doppler is an extension of clinical examination nowadays. So tourniquet tests are generally less preferred these days. That is how you stop it. But for the sake of examination, the various tests are this. Okay, you do not do, you just elicit those tests. Okay, if someone asks, okay, test kiye hai, so you can easily say, so the tests are both unnecessary because duplex is an extension of clinical examination and it is uncomfortable for the patient to do those tests. So these tests are nowadays avoided, but those tests are, these wordings are the exactly wordings you have to use if you do not want to do those tests, or else do the test. I had the same case in my examination. I did not do any of these tests, and neither did the examiner tell me anything. Okay, so this is how you get away from it. And as such, it is not good nowadays. All of the standard textbooks do not recommend this test. Even Bailey and even Indian textbook like SRB also do not recommend these tests. They have given these tests just for the basis because it's of historical importance. But you always get out of your way by saying, as I said, these are uncomfortable and not required because duplex is an extension of our clinical examination. Extension of clinical examination. That is how you get out of it. But because you should know this test, let us start Brody-Trendelenburg test. So there are basically two parts to this test, part 1, part 2, and that is how you say positive, 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 negative, negative, negative. Okay, that is the most important test. As I said, clinical treatment depends on these things. First, the grade, because how severe it is, and secondly, if the grade is within treatable surgical intervention limit, what is involved, because that is how we plan the surgery. Our aim is to let the patient live a life which has less complications and have a good condition of the leg so that it does not go to ulceration and deformity of the foot. If ulceration is present, you start with dressing and treating the ulcer first and then do treatment for it. If not, you directly treat it conservatively first, and secondly, if not conservatively, you should know clinically that what veins are involved. Either it is SFJ incompetence or perforator incompetence. Both of them can be easily ruled out by Brody-Trendelenburg test. Even if you do these tests, never do tourniquet test. Please do not do that. It's a very hassle test, and it has a lot of tourniquets to be tied, and it's a very confusing test both for you, the examiner, and the patient. So tourniquet test is not at all required. The rest of the tests like Morris's, Pert's, and Schwartz and Fagan's test. Fagan's is also not required per se, but still, if you want to do, you can do all those tests. Supposedly, you do not want to get away and you want to do this test, do these tests. Okay. First thing in all this is you should know where is the saphenofemoral junction. So what is that point known as, and how do you find that point? Clinically, how do you find the SFJ?
It is located 3.5 centimeter down below and lateral to the pubic tubercle.
How do you find the pubic tubercle? These are standard questions. You should know that. If you do not know that, there is no need to know hi-fi questions like CEAP classification and the pathophysiology and fibrin cuff theory and all those things, or the treatment part. So these questions are the must questions in clinical examination. SFJ is 3.5 centimeter below and lateral. Okay, from the pubic tubercle. Pubic tubercle is found by
doing the adduction and internal rotation of the thigh at hip joint. We will palpate the pubic tubercle.
What will you palpate? I am the examiner. There's a patient in front of you. What will you do?
Along the tendon of adductor longus.
Yes. So as to say, I will first of all make my patient supine. I will ask the patient to internally rotate his leg against resistance. That is important. You have to make the examiner believe that you have done the test or you know how to do the test, even if you have not done the test. Okay. And even if you have said that I am not doing tests, but you should know the test. So the first thing is I make the patient supine. I will ask the patient to internally rotate his hip, and against resistance, I will palpate the tendon of the adductor longus, and the insertion of that is the pubic tubercle. Okay, that is how you will find the pubic tubercle. Okay, got it? Now moving on to the test. How will you do the Brody-Trendelenburg test? What are the parts of it and how will you do it? What are the parts of the test?
There are two parts of the test. First, we'll make the patient lie in the supine position and elevate the affected limb to empty the veins by milking. Then we will tie the tourniquet at the level of saphenofemoral junction. Then we'll make the patient stand up, wait for 2 to 3 minutes with the tourniquet tied, and look for the filling of the superficial veins. Then we'll remove the tourniquet and see if the veins get further dilated or not.
Then step 1. This step 1 and 2. So what are the conclusions?
If with the tourniquet tied, the veins get filled after some time, the incompetence lies at the perforator levels. And if after removing the tourniquet there is further filling of the veins, then that is incompetence of the saphenofemoral junction. I mean saphenofemoral valve.
Okay. So this is the test for you. There are two parts of the test. As I pointed out, the first step you always start with making the patient supine, elevating the limb, and milking out the veins. Okay, so you milk out the veins, you empty the veins, so you collapse the veins. Okay, so you can feel the veins, the empty grooves of the veins. That is when you till at the point you empty the veins. Okay, you elevate, you milk out. Okay, after that you already found the SFJ. Below the SFJ you just tie a tourniquet, ask the patient to rapidly stand up, wait for 2 minutes. If there is filling, there is obviously filling not from above down but below down, below upwards. So below upwards filling means from the deep vein to the through the valves, through the perforators, coming upwards the superficial veins. So there is a perforator incompetence. If not, you open the tourniquet. If there is vein from above downwards, SFJ is incompetent, it's coming down. That is how you test the two valves, the valve in the perforator, the valve in the SFJ. Clear? A very simple test, and simply it can be done also. There's a simpler test to do. The alternative method is you put your thumb in the SFJ and ask the patient to stand up immediately, and then keep the thumb for 2 seconds to 2-3 minutes, and then remove the thumb. Instead of tourniquet, use the thumb. Okay. So you palpate the pubic tubercle by asking the patient to internally rotate the hip against resistance and see the incision of adductor longus. Find the pubic tubercle, go 3.5 centimeter below and lateral to it. Find the SFJ, put your thumb, press against it. Ask the patient to rapidly stand up. This is obviously after you have milked out everything. Ask the patient to rapidly stand up. See if there is filling slowly, gradually. After 2 to 3 minutes, if yes, it is first positive. If there is first positive, it indicates perforator incompetence. If no, it is first negative. You remove the thumb, see if there is filling from above downwards. If there is, it is second positive. The SFJ is incompetent, and it indicates it is negative positive or negative negative or positive positive. Okay. So that is how you determine the level of incompetence. That is how ultimately, if SFJ is incompetence, the treatment plan changes. Perforator incompetence, treatment plan changes. Okay. Okay. Did everyone get that? The rest, all the tests are not important that way. Still, differential tourniquet test is you tie a variety of tourniquets at a variety of levels of perforators. There are, how many perforators are there in the lower limb? Can you name the perforators? If not, name the location of the perforators. The location of the perforators, please. Anyone?
Ankle perforators, then 3 lower leg perforators. There are Cockett's perforators.
Hello. Hello.
Above knee and below knee perforator.
Yes, above knee, below knee perforators. Then.
And then one is at the level of thigh.
There's a thigh and ankle. Okay. Yeah. So the various names are, one is, can someone tell me the names also if someone knows that?
Sir, Cockett's perforators 5, 10, and 15 centimeters above the medial malleolus, Boyd's perforator below the knee, Dodd's perforator above the knee, and Hunter's perforator in the thigh.
Excellent, very good, perfect. So these are all the perforators. There are 3 perforators as is pointed out, 5, 10, 15 centimeters, one below the knee, one above the knee, and one in the thigh. Cockett, Dodd, Boyd, and Hunter. That is how we set out. It's very important. And if not the names, that sites. Okay, so names can be forgotten a lot of times, but Cockett 1, 2, 3, Boyd, Hunter, Boyd, Dodd, and Hunter. Okay, so but 5, 10, 15 centimeter in the calf above the medial malleolus is important, because that is the calf perforators. One is just below the knee, one is just above the knee, and one is just in the thigh. Okay, so at all this point between each of these, so there are basically 5. So you tie tourniquet between each of these, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So suppose we take the thigh perforator below the SFJ and above the knee, you tie one. That is for that. Between the other two, you tie between the next perforator, the tourniquet. Similarly, between each 2 perforator, you tie tourniquets. You first milk out obviously the veins, but you tie the tourniquets. You release the tourniquet above it. If you see the blood flowing from above downwards between those 2 tourniquets, then obviously that perforator above it is incompetent. If not, it is not. That's a simpler manner to understand it. These days it is not done at all. Okay, so never do tourniquet test. At least, definitely, even if you do all the tests, do not do tourniquet test, because a lot of pain occurs for a patient of varicose veins, and it is not good for the patient too. Okay, so the basic concept is find which perforator is incompetent out of all these. Know the perforators. Why? Because in surgery you should know the location of the perforators. Okay, so obviously Morris's cuff impulse test is basically nothing else but Stephanovarix. If it is present when you as the patient to cuff, there is a visible cuff impulse because of retrograde flow from the SFJ and the SFJ incompetence. Perthes test is something that is important. See, if someone asks classical test for varicose veins, one is Trendelenburg. Classical test for DVT is Perthes test. Okay, so what is Perthes test? Per se nowadays modified Perthes test is done, but what is modified Perthes or Perthes test? That is important. It is used for DVT. What is it? What is Perthes test? Modified Perthes test. Anyone?
A tourniquet is tied at the SFJ level.
No tourniquet is used for Perthes.
Elastic bandages
Yes, then?
To the patient, and the patient
your voice is cutting, so your voice is not coming properly.
Cramping pain. Sorry.
Okay, can someone else repeat if someone else knows? Your voice is not coming properly, Aishwarya, so that is why it is not heard. Perthes test is used for diagnosing DVT. In DVT, you tie a complete elastic crepe bandage over the whole thing, over the whole leg, especially the calf. You ask the patient to walk for 3 to 5 minutes. So if there is a tight bursting type of pain occurring in the calf, it is suggested that it is DVT, because basically the blood is not emptied through the antegrade flow because of DVT, and because of the crepe bandaging, it is not emptied through the varicose veins, through the superficial venous system also. So both the veins have been blocked, both the system have been blocked, so the blood pools over there and there is a tight bursting pain. That is the concept behind it. Okay, crepe bandaging, ask the patient to walk. If there is pain, it is DVT. It is not done. It is strictly not done, because the pain which occurs is very severe. Like, we do not want the patient to feel that much pain. Secondly, it can also sometimes lead to embolus formation from the DVT and lead to PE. Theoretical possibility, not happens, but theoretical possibility. So it is not done. Okay, but you should know Perthes test because it is specific for DVT. Trendelenburg test because it is specific for varicose veins. Okay, so by this now we know the venous system, we know the etiology per se, we know what is the complications occurring, and the perforator which is involved. So now we can diagnose the stamp with a complete diagnosis through this way. Okay, so moving to diagnosis, the varicose vein diagnosis involves 3 to 4 things as always in any diagnosis. First is the pathology. Here the pathology of varicose vein should involve the location, that is the whole CEAP classification, along with the location of which is occurring, long, short or perforator incompetence, specifying which perforator is involved, secondary to whatever etiology or whatever primary or secondary or congenital cause. If you know, if it's a primary cause, you do not specify the risk factors, just write most probably of primary etiology and the complications and the CEAP classification. Okay, so as is mentioned out, the varicosities or varicose patient, as Mr. X said, is a case of left-sided varicose vein involving the great saphenous system or the short saphenous system, which is most probably secondary to incompetence of SFJ or incompetence of the perforators, whatever it is. So here you have to specify what is the incompetence present or where is it present. So location, incompetence of whatever valves it is, along with obviously varicose veins of what side. Then the second thing comes that this completes the whole pathology. Okay, as I say, pathology, etiology, complications and other things. So pathology is completed by this, secondary to primary cause or idiopathic in nature without any evidence of complications or any evidence of ulceration or lipodermatosclerosis or evidence of whatever it is, classifying it according to CEAP classification, whatever it is. So let's say that the patient has skin changes but nothing else, so C4. So etiology primary being EP, anatomically superficial, EAS, and pathology being reflux, so PR. So C4, ES, AP, PR. Okay, so you have to specify it that way. Understood? You have to write the CEAP without evidence of DVT is not important if you have specified it as a primary cause. If a secondary cause, then you have to specify DVT. But perforators involved, system involved, primary, secondary, complications present or not, and CEAP classification. Okay? Got the whole concept of diagnosis, of writing the diagnosis. Its importance is again clinic, as I said, in the treatment part. Did everyone understand the test and the how to write the classification and the diagnosis? Someone is asking how to say which perforators are involved if you don't perform the test. Okay, so per se, if there's perforator incompetence, there will be small variations present in the level of the perforators. As someone pointed out, the whole location of the perforators, there is saphenavarics or there is specific varicosities present at those perforator sites specifically 5, 10, 15 centimeter above thigh, below thigh, then it is more indicative of perforator incompetence rather than SFJ incompetence. SFJ incompetence will have a saphenavarics, or either have to differentiate clinically, or at the most you do a Brody's test, do not do any other test, and you tell the examiner that this is how I tell it. Okay, so if you want to safe sidely do a Brody's test, but do not do any other test, or anatomically you can specify it. See, this is a controversial topic, so it can happen that the examiner is a staunch minded and will say that you will have to do all tests, but by and far nowadays examiner prefer you do not doing the tests. It is not for your convenience only, it is also for your betterment that you do not do those tests, because examiners also don't want you to do the test. Okay, you should know the test only. So this is all about the classification and the diagnosis part. Any doubts in this? Someone is asking if you have to mention DVT test. No, you do not have to mention any test of DVT. Homan or all those signs are not used over here. They are just for your knowledge that these signs are present and you know those signs. Okay, so what are those signs? If someone is asking, what is Homan sign? For DVT, it is used for DVT. What is Homan sign, Namrata? If you have asked, you should know the answer to that.
So on passive forceful dorsiflexion of the foot on extended knee, it causes pain in the patient.
Yes. So it is not done because of that. Again, you do not do any tests that elicit pain in the patient, especially the type of sharp bursting pain that is present in DVT. Okay, so that is what is not done even clinically also, and you do not mention it even clinically. But if asked, you should know what it is. Okay. So a few terminologies which have not been cleared out. What is coronaphlebectasia? What is coronaphlebectasia?
It is telangiectasia on the ankle, around the ankle, also malleolar flare.
Why is it known as that? But what does corona mean?
Due to its shape, fan shape.
Yeah, so someone mentioned out radiating nature. So it looks like a crown, radiating telangiectasia present around the ankle. That is coronaphlebectasia, like a crown, so as to say. The other terminology, that is coronaphlebectasia, the common terminology which you should all know, that one is, as I said, ankle flare. That is nothing else but reticular veins around the ankle region. So ankle flare are reticular veins around the ankle region. That is one thing. The other second thing is lipodermatosclerosis. It is a constellation of syndromes. It is not one sign. Constant syndrome, including everything: hyperpigmentation, thickening of skin, blackening of skin, edema of skin, all those things. Second, the third, saphenopharynx. As I say, SFJ incompetence, the bulge seen in the near the SFJ because of retrograde flow. To test Morris's cough impulse test, saphenopharynx. The fourth thing is Gator's zone, which I already discussed. Gator's zone is the zone around the ankle, commonly prone for varicose ulcer and varicose veins. Atrophic Blanche is something else. What is atrophic Blanche? A lot of terminology in varicose veins. So a lot of tests, a lot of terminologies.
White atrophic skin patch surrounded by capillaries and hyperpigmentation.
Yes, so it's a white patch per se, surrounding black skin. So white patch surrounding black skin. I'll show you that. Yeah. So here you can see this is a lipodermatosclerosis. There is browny edema, slight pigmentation and dermatosclerosis starting off. This is just a lipodermatosclerosis. Above it is a white patch. It is actually not seen clearly, but this is a whitish patch compared to this. There is atrophic Blanche. Okay, that is the first diagram I wanted to show. This is a diagram of varicose veins. You can clearly see varicosities. Which side is involved? If you want to, if someone wants to, let's just spot diagnosis. Can someone tell me the diagnosis as we completely say in this state, if this condition is involved? You can see up to the SFJ and you can see down till the veins. What is it involved? What all things you say? Systematically tell me point wise. Okay. Any one of you?
Varicosity of the right great saphenous venous system.
Yes.
With incompetence of saphenofemoral junction and perforators. Etiology being mostly primary or idiopathic with no complications seen.
Grading?
Grading.
Which is yeah, C.
C3.
Yes.
E and AS.
And PR. Very good. So that is how it, the patient will give classical symptoms of just dull aching, dragging pain and swelling in the leg. You differentiate it. There is no redness, there is no fever, there is no tenderness, there is no bilateral edema per se. There is no other signs of PVD or cellulitis on examination. On history, as I mentioned, short, I'm going in a swift manner. So that is how. Then you come to varicose veins directly. So you can see here diluted tortuous veins, more than obviously about 1 centimeter this is seen. So these are obviously large varicosities. There is no there is no presence of any blackening, hyperpigmentation, lipodermatosclerosis over here near the Gator zone. Okay, so it is still an uncomplicated stage. Okay, so it is hardly C2, not even C3, because C3 means edema. The edema is maybe present, maybe not present. You can say C2, C3. That is how you differentiate it. There is no complications. That is the important part. There is obviously perforated incompetence, because see, this is the ankle. So 5, 10, 15 centimeter below knee, above knee, and thigh, and SFJ. So there is obviously perforated incompetence, maybe SFJ incompetence. We do not know that, but so that is how we start seeing these things. So varicose veins, we ruled out the complications. We see the reflux as a etiology, most probably primary in nature. The complications are said already, and the clinical staging is told already. So that this is a very good picture to summarize the whole thing, to see the DD and to see the complications. Okay. Another picture which I have is of the ulceration. I'll show you that. This is lipodermatosclerosis. This is varicose veins. Yeah, this is telangiectasia or reticular veins. A small, you see the diameter of this, it is, I think so, around 3 to 5 millimeters. So maybe flare or maybe reticular veins or maybe telangiectasia. Okay, these are not varicosities. This, you can compare it with this. Difference, okay? Yeah. This is classical lipodermatosclerosis. You can see thickening of skin with discoloration and dry patches. Okay, lipodermatosclerosis. And this is a complete end stage diagram of varicose veins as a complication. You can see over here the lipodermatosclerosis, the hyperpigmentation surrounding it, the atrophic blanches somewhat is seen over here, and classic ulcer is seen, which is a non-healing type of ulcer. There is mild pale granulation tissue seen, the edges are seen blunted out. There is no active bleeding or oozing, or indicating a non-healing type of ulcer. This is a varicose ulcer. Okay, located classically in the gator zone. Got that? A very good diagram to see all this. Another diagram of lipodermatosclerosis. Okay, so these are all the diagrams I wanted to show you. Okay. Yeah. So I think so we covered almost all the aspects of the tests. I hope you got clear of the test. You should know the classic test, the Perthes test, the Trendelenburg test, an idea about the tourniquet test. Morris's cuff impulse have already ruled out. The anatomy and the complications of it. Moving on to the important two things. The investigation of choice is obviously duplex ultrasound. No other investigations required. Do not start saying plethysmography and all those secondary things are not, venography and all those things. Okay, you do not say all these things. Just duplex ultrasound is used. That is the only first and last investigation required. Okay, the treatment part is important. What is the treatment of choice in your case, Bhakti? What will you do?
So surgery, Trendelenburg operation, stripping of lung saphenous.
Does someone have some else opinion? Varying contrasting opinion is always good to have.
First, medical management can be tried.
Yes, very good. Then, if not medical management, then?
If the medical management has failed, then surgery.
What type of surgery would you like to go? See, she has described in her case a patient which is maybe C2 or C3. Okay, so edema without any skin changes. There is no lipodermatosclerosis, no ulceration, nothing else. Okay, so in this case, by and far, surgery is not done. Okay, unless and until you reach C4, C5, C6, surgeries are not done. C4 is the classic stage in which you do surgeries. C5, C6, ulceration present, you first treat the ulcer, then decide what to do, maybe surgery. C1, 2, and 3, 1, you do not do anything. C2, 3, medical management only. C4, surgery, medical management, controversial. Okay, so Aditi, what is the medical management then? What is the medical management used in varicose veins? And for all of you, yes, the first answer should be always medical management, as she rightly pointed out. Never say surgery directly, and that to never say stripping. Okay, so what is the medical management? What does it consist of?
Sir, Bisgard regimen.
I always tell you these things for all guys repeating. Repeating my lectures. Never speak things that have names, and especially that you do not know the answers to. And even if you know the answer, no, you should then be confident of why you are speaking directly. Do not jump to things. What is Bisgard regiment for? That guy who has answered that. What is Bisgard regiment? Why is it useful?
Sir, Bisgard regimen include limb elevation, the massage, and stockings, compressive stocking.
Exercises, not stockings. Yeah. So Bisgard regimen is a triad of limb elevation, massaging, and exercises, of calf exercises per se. But what is it used for? Someone else? Can someone else answer him? What is Bisgard regimen used for?
Venous ulcers.
Yes. So it is used for varicose veins or venous ulceration. It is used for venous ulceration, not varicose veins. Like when I'm talking about management of varicose veins, do not jump to things, please. Do not say stripping. Do not say surgery. Do not say Bisgard regimen. The answer should be, as someone pointed out, medical management. Followed by that, if not treated, I will move on to surgical management. I will first of all try minimally invasive methods. If not possible, I will move on to more invasive methods like surgery. That is how your answer should be. Generalize your answer always in vivas. I know you have a lot of less exposure in vivas these days, but that is why we are doing this. As in the history taking, we have a specific pattern. As I have told you, rule out things, come to diagnosis, say the complications. In the treatment part, in the investigation parts, both of them, there are a few key points, headings in every case that you have to speak. Okay. Suppose in investigations, it is always, I would do my investigation to confirm my diagnosis and to rule out those complications. In this case, everything is done in duplex. That is fine. In other cases, there are a variety of things. I would do my treatment firstly by medically, followed by surgical intervention, always in all cases. So here, the medical treatment firstly is limb elevation, compression stockings. These two things. Bisgard regimen is used for venous ulcer and ulcers only, not for varicose veins. When ulceration is there, Bisgard regimen is basically you do massaging of the leg, you tell him to exercise, and you do compression or some stocking like that type of thing. But that triad is not used for varicose veins. It is used for varicose ulcers or venous ulcers. So medical management, the first line is compression stockings. The compression stockings are graduated or gradually increasing pressure type of stockings with maximum pressure at the ankle, going above, decreasing pressure. Pressure is a variety of types. You don't need to know that. There are a variety of stockings available in the market for that, but it is specifically graduated compression stockings and limb elevation. Limb elevation, you should tell the patient कि at least 2 बार दिन में पैर नाक से ऊपर या सिर से ऊपर लेके आए. That is the at least height he requires. Not कि limb elevation is a 2 centimeter to 2 meter elevation. It is not the elevation that is required to decrease edema. It is elevation of about 2 to 5 minutes. Just 2 times a day is required. Then he elevates the limb above his head, or at least above his nose. That is the elevation that is at least required. That is one limb elevation. Stockings, as I said, he should wear the stocking during the daytime. Graduated compression stockings, 8 hours a day. As soon as he sleeps, he should remove it. He should wear it the first thing as soon as he gets up, before getting out of his bed. Okay, before getting out of his bed, I will ask the patient to wear compression graduated stockings, and I will ask the patient to elevate his leg above his head for at least above the level of his head, or above the level of his nose, or above the level of his heart per se. That is the basic pathophysiology. 2 times a day for 5 minutes. That is enough. These two things, conservative management, followed by that a few drugs are used. Drugs like pentoxifylline and daflon are used. Not important for you. It is fine. This is followed by management depending on the severity. If it is C1, C2, smaller veins, we can do sclerotherapy, local sclerotherapy. If it is larger veins, we can go by endovenous ablation methods. See, stripping per se is not the first choice or even not even the last choice nowadays, because of the sole fact that has been found in variety of studies that post stripping around 30% chances of recurrences are there because of neovascularization. Because of the injury you cause during stripping, there is increased chances of neovascularization around that place, which leads to increased chances of recurrences. So stripping is not like the last method also. It is somewhere in between. In places where endovenous or minimally invasive methods are not present, you can go for stripping after sclerotherapy. Okay, so medical management, if it is finished, smaller reticular veins or mild small incompetent perforators, not SFJ perforators, not no larger veins involved, or old age patients, medically unfit patients, all those things, especially smaller veins, you inject sclerosant directly inside the veins and sclerose the veins. This is a blind rather than a clinical procedure. No USG is used in this case. In a few cases pertaining minimal invasive methods are not used, you do Trendelenburg operation, that is high ligation along with stripping of veins. But nowadays the treatment of choice is minimal invasive methods, either radio frequency ablation or laser treatment. Okay, these are the two methods used nowadays. Other methods are also present, but the common methods are these two, and each of them is similar to the next. There is no difference in results. Okay, so both of them are similar. There is no radio frequency better than laser or laser better than radio frequency. Both of them are similar. That is how your answer should be. That is the variety of things should be done. Commonly asked next question is, what is the sclerosant used? What is the ideal and the cheapest sclerosant? Both things. What is sclerosant used? Name of that?
STDS.
SDS or STDS, that is sodium tetrodecyl. What is the full form of STDS?
Sodium tetradecyl sulfate.
Yes, and the other used is the two commonly used, SDS and SDS and polidocanol. These are the commonly two sclerosants used, and in older days hypertonic saline was used. Okay, so these are the three sclerosant names you should know. Okay, nowadays SDS is a commonly used thing, if not hypertonic saline. Okay, in some cases polidocanol, it is a costly drug, so SDS is the first choice. The second is hypertonic saline. These are directly injected inside the veins, and the vein basically sclerosis. Okay, that is how the pathophysiology of it is. In endovenous methods, what happens is a USG guided duplex or an ultrasound guided probe is placed. A needle is firstly inserted into the veins starting most distally, then a guide wire is inserted. The guide wire is gradually taken till the SFJ. The guide wire is removed and a catheter over it is inserted. After the catheter over is inserted, the catheter is of two types, either it is a radio frequency probe or a laser probe, whatever is it. Then the patient is given anesthesia over the whole part, local infiltration anesthesia, which is known as tumescent anesthesia. I'm writing that. It is a dilute anesthesia. It is not anesthesia used regularly in the G and LA part. Okay, so that is used, and then whatever probe you are using is used according to the method, either radio frequency probe or laser probe, and the vessel or the blood is occluded. In the laser part, the mechanism of action is that laser basically leads to heating or heating of the blood column present in the veins, ultimately leading to thrombosis of the vessel. In the radio frequency part, the radio frequency waves that are used leads to damage of the endothelium and directly the lumen of the vessel and leading to occlusion of the vessel. So the mechanism is a bit different. Laser acts on the liquid or blood column part, radio frequency acts out directly on the lumen part. Both of them occlude the lumen and basically the varicosities disappear. So obviously for all varicose veins, for surgical management, there is one contraindication present, which is, what are the contraindications for any type of surgical management in varicose veins?
Presence of DVT.
And why is that?
Because the deep veins are now thrombosed, so all the blood is going through the superficial system. So if that is also removed, then the patient will end up in edema.
Perfect. So that is why you always rule out DVT. In everything, history, examination, duplex, DVT is always ruled out. That is the most important thing. And if there is DVT, you do not do anything. Okay, the maximum thing you can do invasively is sclerotherapy of small veins, nothing else. Not even big. There are two types of sclerotherapy. One is the office setting sclerotherapy, that is directly blind puncture veins. You sew the vein, you inject sclerotherapy, and you finish it off. In a larger setting, sometimes there is the USG guided sclerotherapy, which is known as UGS. USG guided sclerotherapy, UGS. This thing is a similar thing as used for radiofrequency and endovenous ablation, in which throughout the vein you put sclerosant a bit of it and sclerose the whole large vein. Okay, that is also not done in case of DVT. Okay, the last is obviously stripping and high ligation of the SFJ. You ligate the SFJ near its origin and you strip the vein with the help of cord vein stripper. Not done nowadays, just for history basis. Up to what extent is the great saphenous vein stripped, and up to what extent is the small saphenous vein stripped, and why? These are the common questions asked. What is the extent from what to what? Proximal to distal, and distal to proximal, how much and why? What is the extent of stripping? No one knows that.
Great saphenous is only up to the knee because below the knee is associated with the saphenous nerve, so that could get injured.
And small saphenous?
Small saphenous is not stripped.
Small saphenous, when if stripping is done in case of small saphenous, obviously it ends at the calf, so it is done up to the mid calf only because of injury to sural nerve, which is present even lower down near the ankle. And but the important question definitely in terms of viva is great saphenous vein is not stripped below the below the level of the knee, because after the knee there is a closer association of saphenous of the nerve with the great saphenous vein, so it leads to injury of that. As I said, the most common complication, the most important complication of stripping is recurrences. I'm not telling recurrences do not happen in endovenous procedures, but it occurs very commonly even post stripping. That is why it is not an ideal method. Okay, ideal method is still minimally invasive outdoor procedures, less easily convenient to the patient, easily convenient to the surgeon, less complications. Okay, so that is a short summary of the treatment part 2, and if someone else has some doubts, we can clarify that. There are obviously a lot of methods for treatments, but we're not going in each and every one of them. Okay. Yes, so someone is asking, can someone tell me what is the procedure known as SEPS? It's a newer technique. Sometimes it may be asked. I don't know, someone's asked me that. So, what is SEPS?
Subfacial endoscopic perforator.
Yeah. So it is basically subfacial endoscopic perforator ligation. So, as I said, we have to classify the level of perforator. See, in SFJ incompetence and everything, you do the end of SFJ incompetence is present. If it is, you do the endovenous procedures starting from the SFJ till the distally, the whole part. Sometimes there can be only isolated perforator incompetence. In that, there are a few options. There are two options. One is surgically you mark, you do a duplex ultrasound. Duplex ultrasound, the radiologist marks the location of the incompetent perforators with the help of a cross mark near the calf muscles. You put a small stab incision near those incompetent perforators where the perforator is marked. You take the vein outside, dissect the vein and take the vein outside and ligate the vein. Okay, specific for perforators. Okay, that is an important thing. That is why we differentiate if it is SFJ or only perforator or both incompetence. Both incompetence, then obviously you will do the whole thing, the whole endovenous procedure. If SFJ incompetence, then also you will have to do the endovenous procedure or the stripping or whatever it is. But if only incompetent perforator, a surgery is just isolated ligation of the incompetent perforators, which can be done. This is a surgical method. You localize the perforators, give anesthesia over there, a local incision, local dissection, local ligation. Okay, understood it? Suppose there is a incompetent perforation 5, 10, 15 centimeters above the ankle, as I said, a local dissection is done. But sometimes a method nowadays uses SEPS, subfacial endoscopic perforator ligation. A minimal invasive method, you put a endoscope subfacially and ligate it. The technique is not important, the name is important. Okay, this wraps up basically the whole management part. perforators and SFJ, and the various modalities. Okay, for varicose ulceration, as someone said, Biscard's regimen is used, and a compression stocking, a triple layer compression stocking. That is what is clinically used. A triple layer compression stocking with zinc oxide as the agent for tapping is used. Okay, that is all about varicose ulcers and varicose veins. So with that, I think we conclude the whole part. If there's any questions, we'll address that, and then we'll finish the lecture. Does anyone have any questions so as to clarify? So you should, by the end of this lecture, you should know everything with respect to at least diagnosing a varicose veins and treating a varicose veins. Okay. I hope so. You got everything. If there's still any doubts, you can address those doubts on the groups. And next time I'll ask some of you, please volunteer for the case next time. So you can directly message me if you want to volunteer for the case, because a lot of guys have already presented it. So we'll see it next time. So thank you for today. Okay.